Now that we've had Joe Brady as head coach of the Buffalo Bills for more than 5 minutes, the question becomes, how do we as Bills Mafia fans feel? And the answer is, well, gosh darn it if we can't convince ourselves of anything. Hi, I'm Nick. This is 10 Minutes with Nick. And about a week ago at this time, everybody was lampooning the Bills for the internal hire of Joe Brady. Joe Brady, the new head coach of the Buffalo Bills, was hired in what can only be described as a Game of Thrones style power struggle. At least that's how it appeared from the outside. Something you need to know about the Buffalo Bills to understand this. Prior to the hiring of Joe Brady, Sean McDermott and Brandon Beane each separately reported to owner Terry Pegula. Now, that's not that common in the NFL. Typically, power structures are ordered in such a way that you have the owner, then you have the GM, then you have the head coach. The GM has the ability to fire the head coach. That was not the case in Buffalo. In Buffalo, Sean McDermott had a separate contract directly to Terry Pegula. Brandon Beane had a separate contract directly to Terry Pegula, which in and of itself is an odd power system to have on a football team. You typically want your GM to be able to handle all aspects of the business side, including the coaches. But if we go back several more weeks, everybody wanted Sean McDermott's head. And rightly so. Sean McDermott is a great, great coach. I'm not taking anything away from his ability as a coach. But any coach can have a message that gets stale, and Sean McDermott's message was no different. Now, a lot of these thoughts I'm having today are precipitated by an article I read by Ty Dunn, who is an excellent sports writer. He's very tuned into specifically the Buffalo Bills, but also nationally. And he published in December of 2023, I think, a 3-part article on the culture that Sean McDermott had fostered. And me personally, I think it was a bit unfair. It wasn't inaccurate, as we found out. I just found it to be unfair. To Ty Dunn's credit, he later went back and had a one-on-one with Sean McDermott, and Ty acknowledged throughout McDermott's career that he actually vastly improved as a coach. The problem always for McDermott was the key playoff games that the Bills had to win, whether it was against the Chiefs or against the Bengals or this year against the Broncos. Sean McDermott is what is classified as a defensive head coach. Now, for those of you who don't follow football all that closely, defensive head coaches are known for their defensive schemes. That goes without saying. But if you're going to be a defensive head coach, then the identity you create on the defensive side of the football has to be strong and it has to be effective. The problem with McDermott's is that too often his identity on that side of the ball was ineffective. He played what is known as a 4-3 base, meaning 4 down defensive linemen and 3 linebackers. Now, that allows you a lot of flexibility on the back end to play coverage games, which his defenses were known for. They were known to give rookie quarterbacks fits with their disguised coverages and simulated pressures and stuff like that. The problem was, in reality, the games all broke down into 4-man rushes, meaning whether it was going to be 4 defensive linemen rushing or 2 defensive linemen rushing and 2 linebackers rushing. It was, at the end of the day, there was no real blitz packages out of it. It was typically not an aggressive defense. It was designed to be a sit back, keep everything in front of you, and bend don't break defense. And the key to the defense when you're running a 4-3 is that your front 4, whoever ends up rushing from that 4 package, They have to be able to get to the quarterback and disrupt his timing. And when you're rushing with only 4 all the time, that is hard to do. That is incredibly hard to do, and it requires a lot of juice up front. Or it requires a very complex simulated game that you run where the quarterback can't understand what you're doing. You have to in some way disrupt the QB's timing so the coverage on the back end can be aggressive. The problem was too often in McDermott's defense, and we saw this in a 3rd and 11 in the Broncos game when the Bills were up 27-23. It was 3rd and 11, and the Broncos ended up gaining 23 yards because Bo Nix was able to find an open receiver in a soft part of the zone. Zone coverages are great for being able to clog passing lanes, but there are always soft spots, and the soft spots are always in the same areas. That's why you have to disguise the coverage so that the quarterback doesn't know where he's going. McDermott's defenses always had soft spots, and it seemingly was always in the middle in the middle third of the field, or in the outside third, or in the deep third. He always had these soft spots, and it always showed up in the playoffs against better teams. And the reason it always showed up against the better teams is because in the playoffs, your margin of error gets much lower. The quarterbacks get much smarter, the coaches get much smarter, and they know where they're looking. The other problem that McDermott's defenses have is if you have to blitz, you then get rid of the magic of that back end, which is you've flooded the back end with coverage. You lose one of those coverage people, and when you blitz, there is always space behind the blitzer, and if they're smart, then they have somebody waiting right behind that blitzer, or they know they can throw to that spot safely. And that's the problem, more often than not, is that I don't even know if it was, quote-unquote, a cultural tightness at one Bills drive. It was simply a defensive scheme that over the years had gotten stale, and whether or not it was figured out, quote-unquote, right? The Houston Texans run a similar scheme in reality. The difference is the Houston Texans personnel is much different and much stronger. That scheme and the message from McDermott got stale, which sucks. Because Sean McDermott, nicest guy in the world, and deserving of a Super Bowl as much as a Josh Allen is deserving of a Super Bowl. So now the change has come with Joe Brady. And the question is, how does Joe Brady fix that? Well, he started by hiring defensive coordinator Jim Leonhard, who was previously the defensive passing game coordinator of the Broncos. Jim Leonhard comes not from a 4-3 defensive schematic tree, but he comes from a 3-4, 3 down defensive linemen, 4 linebackers, 2 inside linebackers, 2 outside linebackers. This defensive style is naturally a much more aggressive and much more multiple front. With the 4 linebackers, you can have 2 outside linebackers who in a 4-3 would be defensive ends. You can run lighter packages. You can run more people in coverage. You can run different games, stunts, whatever you want to play. But he's young. Same with Joe Brady. Joe Brady's 36. I think Jim Leonhard's 43, something like that. The oldest guy on the team right now is I think the oldest guy in the coaching staff is offensive coordinator Peter Carmichael, who was with Joe Brady when Joe Brady was working with Sean Payton and the Saints. And on offense, I don't know what you change necessarily. And that's another problem, is the Bills' offense was also pretty stale. Now, you can try to sell me on the idea that Sean McDermott influenced that defense is the best offense, essentially, right? Like Sean McDermott, you can tell me that Sean McDermott wanted a run-heavy team in order to chew clock and keep the other offense off the field. You could try to sell me on that, and I might buy it. But did Sean McDermott call wide receiver screens on every 3rd down? Now, granted, I can't get too critical of Joe Brady's offense. He scored 30 points a game, right? He scored a whole mess of touchdowns. He scored, he coached Josh to an MVP season. He coached James Cook to an rushing title. So with the offense, admittedly, he did do a good job. But I don't know if I can get sold on the idea of Joe Brady as the answer to the Super Bowl. Ty Dunn seems to think so. He's got hope. So, I guess we'll wait and see. But those are my takes. If they make any sense, like and subscribe. If they don't make any sense, we'll still like and subscribe. And then you can comment and you can tell me they don't make any sense. And I would appreciate that. But have a happy Monday. I'm Nick. This is 10 Minutes with Nick. Have a great day.